sustainability, more durable production of everything, like the good old days.
So to me, sustainability is taking every step you can to like protect the planet and to make sure that if you have kids that they'll have as good a planet as you had.
I wouldn't even know where to start, to be honest. Yeah, I'm not sure what it means.
I think a good work-life balance, actually.
Sustainability for me is thinking about the way I interact with others in my world and in my space, and how my impacts with them align with my own personal values.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've only got one planet, and it's beautiful, and we should do what we can to preserve its inherent value.
I actually think quite deeply when I think about sustainability, and being in New Zealand, I actually relate a little bit of it to the Treaty of Waitangi, would you believe? Because I believe that there are principles within the Treaty of Waitangi that also apply to the principles of sustainability, particularly about remembering where we've been, where we are now and where we're going.
Good point.
And so I think it's really good to reflect on that while you're working, particularly, and in your home life as well, but particularly that what you are doing is sustainable for yourself, your family, your environment.
Let's just have a quick recap of what we have looked at so far. What we've really been sitting with is your own interpretation of sustainability, and also where you sit in terms of environmental philosophy. We've looked at baseline in terms of how you are contributing and what your initial thoughts are on sustainability. And we've also worked with the feeling of how you feel about sustainability, not just the logical, theoretical understanding of it. And this comes into a couple of different intelligences. So you've probably heard of IQ, right? Intellectual intelligence. And there's also some other intelligences that we have. So emotional intelligence, there's a lot of research coming out around emotional intelligence and how we interact with other people. And that's where I was getting you to think about emotionally how you connect to place, okay, special places that you have been connected to, and also your place in the world, how you fit into a wider system, which also links into your identity, right? So how that informs what you think, what you believe, and therefore your practice, how you behave. There's also another form of intelligence that's getting a lot of traction, a lot of research around this too, particularly from neuroscience and psychology, and that is BQ, which is body intelligence. So that is, what do we feel in our body from the neck down, and that's where we did a mindfulness activity. Now we're going to turn on our cognitive brain, our critical thinking skills, and start to look at some sustainability theory. And you will have noticed the order that I've put that in. So we didn't do that first and filled you with a lot of concepts and ideas from other people and perhaps how it should be. I've really invited you to explore how you feel and your relationship, your identity, your place in this world first before we go into the theory. Theory is important though, and there are lots of people who have done lots of thinking on this that we can learn and grow from. So let's look at a couple of different sustainability models, and we're also going to look at critiquing them. And a reminder that critiquing is about critical analysis, so what is not working about this model. It also includes what is working, what you resonate with, what you see as helpful and useful to you and your context. So let's get started into some theory of sustainability. The first thing that I'll say about sustainability theory is that there is no right or wrong, and that every perspective has a critique. We have already looked at environmental philosophy from those different columns, so you can imagine that each person and each perspective from each of those columns will see sustainability in a very different way. There are, however, some more common or well-defined definitions that we will look at today. And I invite you to think about perhaps the pros and the cons of each of these models as we start to work through them. This will be part of your assessment questions at the end. So one of those common definitions is one from the Brundtland Report, or this report was also called Our Common Future. And this was published in 1987, and it first started looking at what is sustainable development. That was starting to become a new concept or new terminology back then. And it said this: sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This is very much a replacement definition, so what I take is also what I give back, and this creates the balance in the world. That can become interesting or potentially problematic when we start looking at finite resources, such as gas, oil. You could even look at water as a finite resource, gold, minerals. So if some of these resources have taken millions of years to develop, such as, let's look at oil, for example, then there's only so much that is in the crust of the earth. And therefore, we don't really have time to wait a couple of million years for oil to be developed again. Therefore, is it still okay to extract that, or is it okay to replace it with something else? Another form. Lots of interesting things to weigh up. And then people have tried to explain sustainability with diagrams or in a visual form. So the circle model is very common, and this is perhaps a bit more of an older model. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see the board, but I'm going to pop it up on the screen. And it uses 3 circles. And inside the middle circle, we have economy. The next one is social. And the last one is environment. And now before I critique this a little bit, I would like to invite you just to sit and reflect on this model. And I want to know, does this sum up how you see sustainability? What do you think this model is trying to express or trying to say? Perhaps in terms of the importance of these different aspects of sustainability. Is there any problem with this model? Is it missing something related to your worldview of sustainability? So let's look at different viewpoints on how we could see this model. The first one is from the economy out. So you could look at this model and go, cool, the economy is right in the middle. That is the central point. That is where everything else comes from. So when we have a strong economy, then socially people are well looked after, people's needs are getting met. And when our economy is flourishing, and therefore our people are flourishing, then they also have the capacity to look after the environment. If you go back to environmental philosophy and go more towards that ruthless developer or that cornucopian view of sustainability, this could be the viewpoint or how you might look and see this model. Let's see if there's another way to view this model. You could say that the bigger ring is the environment. So we have this big ring around the outside, and on top of that are smaller circles, which could lead you to believe that the smaller circles are of lesser importance or are contained within the wider circle of the environment. So from the outer circle in, the argument would be, well, without the environment, we actually have nothing. People can't live without the environment, and we definitely don't have an economy if we don't have people. Therefore, the environment, the bigger circle, is the most important. On top of that is our social. The social lives within the environment. And then on top of that is a smaller circle, is the economy. And that is only important because it's in relation to the social context and the wider environmental context. What do you think about the relationship, or how this model starts to look at the relationship between these three concepts? So in other words, is it really clear what the relationship is? Or perhaps the importance or the power dynamic between these different aspects of sustainability? So part of this critique is that this doesn't show the whole picture of what sustainability is, and that it's a little bit limited or oversimplified. So then there was a transition or a move more towards a Venn diagram. So I'm going to draw that up now, or put it on the screen. So these are three equal circles, and there are different models. So not all the models are exactly the same with the three circles, but this is a general one that you'll see quite often. And again, in each of these three circles sums up those different areas of sustainability. So we have economy, social, and environmental. What do you think is different, or the benefit of this model compared to the other one? And is there anything missing? Was there a disadvantage of this one compared to the other one? And what does this say about the relationships of the three different aspects? So what's different about this model is this place in the middle. We talk a lot about that place in the middle, right? Of where these different parts start to intersect and inform and influence one another. So in an ideal situation, the place in the middle is where sustainable development or sustainability happens. And I'm wondering, do you think that that is really realistic? And perhaps what is not said in this model? So this model could start to move away from maybe the misinterpretation that the other model had of the economy being really in the centre. It's quite clear that there are three separate aspects of sustainability here, and they seem to be of equal importance. And I'm going to say that again. These three aspects appear in this model to be of equal importance. And I'm wondering if that is your experience of sustainability. It depicts a different relationship to the other model. And there could potentially be a thought process around if we could increase perhaps our social sustainability, then maybe that's okay, because we can also balance it out with an environmental aspect or economic aspect. So, for example, it could be that the project that you're managing is economically not viable. So that's a downwards arrow, right? You could see that as making the circle a lot smaller. But it was really benefiting the community. So that might put an arrow up, or it might increase the size of the social circle. And does that mean that we can substitute one area of sustainability for another? And if they're of equal importance, is that okay? So if we were really protecting one aspect of this or making one of these circles bigger, does that still allow us to have balance and find the place in the middle? All really interesting questions to ask and answer. Now let's look at a couple of other models, and there are so many models out there, what sustainability could be. This one is way less about circles and way more about relationship. And it reminds me of when we talked about, are we a part of nature or apart from nature? And the interconnectedness of sustainability. So what would be the strength of this model and what it was depicting? And what are the disadvantages? Or what is it not expressing? And with all these three models we've looked at so far, my question is also around culture. Is that an equal circle of equal importance? Or is it encompassed within the social aspect? How important is that to you to be depicted in a sustainability model? Now the last model we're going to look at is the Trajectory of Ecological Design by Bill Reed. And I find this one really interesting because it starts to broaden our understanding of what sustainability could be. So right in the middle here, you see that we have what is sustainable. And we have arrows. There's less energy is required. That would put us more into the green, so above the line, perhaps more sustainable. And then you also have below the line, or perhaps less sustainable with more energy that's required. So this model is split into above and below of more sustainable, less sustainable, but also a left to a right. So you can see that being sustainable is just in the middle. And what does that suggest about the other behaviours or other practice that could be to the left and to the right of sustainability? And you could start to link this back into the environmental philosophy of the different columns that we started to explore. So perhaps this starts to show or suggest that sustainability is not just one thing, but it's on a spectrum that can flow up and down. And I want to bring special attention to the restorative and the regenerative aspects of this model. So sustainability, if we go back to the Brundtland report, is replacing what we're using for future generations. And what could it be if we started to have a mindset of being restorative? So not just replacing, but starting to plant more trees, starting to look after the ecosystems that we are impacting. Or even regenerative, so it's even more than what we're extracting, and it's really going into the positive of the ecosystems around us are so healthy and so well supported that the balance has been completely tipped. It's not just, oh my gosh, can we only extract so much so that we can replace it so that humans can keep surviving, but inherently looking after the wider ecosystems so that they flourish on their own, that there is an abundance. And humans will probably have the ability to extract from those ecosystems, but there is so much more in reserve. And when you start to look at your creative project, I'm wondering, where on this scale, perhaps, could you start to look at your project from? Are you interested in just being sustainable? So if you're using materials, physical materials, it could be about replacing that physical material so it's carbon neutral, or it's a material from the environment. Is there a restorative or a regenerative action that you could take? So, for example, some companies have things like for every product that you buy, $1 or $2 goes back into a regenerative project. It could be related to carbon credits, so to make your product carbon zero, or even better than carbon zero is that you're giving back, then buying carbon credits to offset the materials that you're using. If you're looking at it from a social perspective, what is the educational value here? Could education and teaching others start to lead to a restorative mindset and or restorative or regenerative action? So that's the idea of a ripple effect starting to go out. If I'm teaching you, then you teach others, and that starts to spread, teaching or inspiring others. So how could this model be relevant to you? And does this link into your own ethos or identity or place of how you see sustainability? And I'm going to invite you to do some more research around different models. There are many, many out there, to look at the pros and cons of them and how they relate to you. And then share them as part of your assessment journal down below.